Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Moxxie podcast. It's Michelle, and I am super glad you're here. Thank you so much for being here. This week, we're going to be talking about 3 phases of the tarot. And we're going to be talking about them from the perspective of feeling like perhaps you're not getting everything you want out of your tarot reading, and what we can do to sort of expand our understanding of how more experienced readers approach things. I first started messing around with tarot cards back in my 20s, and it was kind of like smash and grab. I'd whip out my cards, I'd ask a question, I'd lay out the spread, I'd grab the book or books, look up every possible meaning I could, usually glomming on to the ones that I wanted to pay attention to, and of course, like the elements of the card that were the most frequently noted. Then I would write down the keywords and I'd stare at them and I would think, how do I take those 5 or 10 keywords and translate that into something meaningful? Here are my keywords. I have strength, fortitude, kindness, the number 8, just these, what seems like disparate, almost random words that people put together with good intentions, right? Because the keywords are actually really helpful once you have learned the meanings for the most part, because then the keywords act as the catalyst and then just, send the message to whatever part of your brain that actually needs that information, and it's there. But when you're first learning how to read the tarot, it can be really confusing. So I would just stare at those cards, or not the cards, I would stare at the meanings and the lists. And sometimes I would decide that I probably should just reshuffle because I didn't do something right? Because they weren't making any sense, because I didn't get what I wanted out of it. Or I would stick to my guns and do the reading. It was usually a pretty shallow one, because if the only information I'm looking at is keywords, that's just really, like I said, it's enough to get you started, but it is not enough to teach someone how to read the tarot. Those are there as a prompt, not as the be-all and the end-all for learning how to read. So I lost interest pretty quickly because I wasn't getting anything that I felt was useful out of my practice. And it wasn't really until I felt called to come back to the tarot years later that if I wanted to read the way I was describing, then I just have to learn the card meanings. Period. That's how I was told, the psychic 2x4 cracked upside the head thing. It's like, nope, you're going to have to learn the card meanings. Once you learn the card meanings, we'll help you out further, but you have to do that basic work. So this time, I went whole hog. I dove into those flashcards like a maniac. Knowing the card meanings improved my readings so much. But I still felt like I was missing something. Knowing the card meanings improved my ability to glean information from a particular card by far. And because I had much more context having learned all of the card meanings. There are so many things that cross over, so many symbols and themes, that in addition to having the core knowledge of each card, you can begin to sort of develop this richer vocabulary and this richer experience within the tarot. I hope this makes sense. So even though my readings were better, even though I felt like I was getting something out of each individual card, I was still missing something. My readings felt perfunctory. They felt way too tied to the literal card meanings I had just learned. So once again, I'm frustrated. I thought for sure that taking the time to learn the meanings was going to make all the difference in the world. And it made an incredible amount of difference. But for what I was looking for, the depth of the relationship with the tarot that I was looking for, something was still missing. So my natural inclination is always to learn more if something that I'm doing isn't working. And I started to study the tarot as a whole system, a system of interwoven history, mythology, symbolism, modern culture, everything. And I started to realize that anybody can memorize card meanings. Not anybody, but most of us, if we're willing to take the time, can memorize card meanings. But it takes an imagination and a storyteller and a mind that is willing to try to bring these things together and weave a narrative that not only makes sense, but is helpful. So I started to realize that as long as my focus was on getting the reading just right, technically correct, my readings would continue to be shallow. I realized that it's my job as the reader is to function like a storyteller who can weave a narrative from all of these concrete elements, like the tarot suits and the card meanings and the symbolism, who can take all of that information and blend it with my intuition, my deductive skills, my analytical skills. It's this beautiful marriage of logic, knowledge, and energy is the only word I can think of. So I started to look at it and it's like, okay, there are 3 phases. There's the groundwork phase, which probably most of you are already doing. There's the analysis phase, which you're probably already doing. But what I suspect is missing, and what was missing from my readings for a long time, was the synthesis phase. And we're going to talk about all 3 of those. We've talked about groundwork. We've talked about things like grounding and centering, meditating, praying, candles, whatever works for you to bring you into the best mental and spiritual space for a reading is what you need to do for your groundwork. And we've talked about that. Don't need to get into a whole lot of other information. And there's tons of information out there in the world about this. So yeah, you need to bring yourself into a mental, emotional, and I even recommend a physical space if you have like a little altar space or you have a meditation cubby or anything along those lines where it's a special place with more reverence than some of the other places in your house, and where you can open up and be in the most receptive state and feel safe and comfortable. So analysis is what most of us think of as the meat of the reading when we're interpreting the cards and what they mean, right? Card A in position 3 means X. And a lot of readers get stuck, like me, in my opinion, but I think it's true. A lot of readers get stuck in this analysis phase because most teaching materials, teaching beginners, are almost oversimplified in some ways. And you'll get a book, it's like, learn the tarot in 20 minutes. And it's a book with a cute deck and some extremely shallow explanations and a few keywords. So since that's what most of us learn. That's how most of us learn. Most of us are not taking tarot lessons, although I wish I had had access to them. Yeah, I mean, most people are not listening to a podcast like this on a regular basis. They don't have the advantage of this information. Now, don't get me wrong, analysis is critical. You have to be able to analyze the cards. Synthesis, though, is the last step. And synthesis is where the tarot magic happens. When we synthesize, what we're doing is we're taking all of the bits of information, every nugget of knowledge in the reading, and we're using all of these things as the ingredients for creating a conclusion, a story. So just like any good cook, they consider how their ingredients work together, how they play off one another. How does, why the heck do we put salt in cookies? Well, we put salt in cookies because just that little teeny tiny bit of salt brings out the additional yummy caramelization and buttery flavors of those cookies. Same idea here. How are these cards playing off one another? How are the card positions playing off one another? Let's say, you have moved on, you're doing more than 3 card readings now. Maybe you are developing some of your own readings. And when you have these larger readings, it's time to start taking a look at the information that's in front of you as a whole, as a unit, and potentially as even a whole that has subunits. And what the heck does that mean? What that means is looking at your reading as a whole with the purpose of bringing together the story of that reading. And it's hard to articulate. If you go back and listen to any of the episodes where I have read for other people and then posted them, you'll begin to see and hear that synthesis process, right? It's the process after you've gone through your cards. It's the process after you said, okay, this is this card, this is the King of Wands, and he is in this position, and I interpret that this card in this position means X. And you've done that already with all of your cards. Great. Now it's time to kick it up. Now it's time to look at that reading as a whole. Do you have any information maybe in cards relating to the past and cards relating to the present that play off of one another? Is there something going on in the past that is impacting the present? Are there a large number, in relationship to the size of the reading, a large number of a certain suit, or a large number of a particular number, card number? What is, overall, is the reading one that is a very grounded reading, meaning there are a lot of pentacles in that reading and it's very, what do I want to call it, stable, grounded, practical? Or is it a reading where there are a lot of swords and there's a lot of tension and energy and overthinking going on? All of these elements of the tarot, and these are things that do take time to learn. They take time, they take trust in yourself to begin to work with and to begin to implement. But they really do make an enormous difference. So if you're just beginning your tarot journey, don't stress. You've got your card spread in front of you and you've made notes on every card. Fantastic. That's great. And you've even articulated why each card or what each card means in its position. So you did it. That's fantastic. Give yourself a pat on the back and start to consider, don't worry about what you actually see or get from it. Just start to look at your spreads as a whole. So let's go back through these real quick before we So let's say you just did your reading. You have all of your cards out. You did the thing, but it still doesn't feel right. It feels, what's the word? Pedantic? Too teacherly. Doesn't feel personalized to you. It feels like a bunch of, disparate pieces of information that have sort of made themselves aware to you, but how the heck do you blend all of that stuff together? So now that you have this, step back, look at your reading as a whole, and ask yourself some of these questions. Again, do I have multiples of the same number? If so, which number is it? What's the numerology behind that number? How might the numerology of the reading impact the overall reading? Do you have a large number of one suit? Again, we talked about that. Which suit, what are the characteristics, and how might those characteristics impact the situation as a whole? Is your reading missing any suits? Say you did a reading for yourself about a relationship with someone and there's not one cup in that reading. That might be something to consider, right? It's like, wow, this is a reading that is all about romance, or that in my mind anyway is all about romance, about this particular person, about how I feel about this person, and I'm getting swords and wands. What in the world is going on? Additionally, court cards. Court cards are something that you really want to pay attention to. You are going to want to ask yourself these questions. Are there multiples? Who do the court cards in the reading represent? How do these people interact and get along? Is there positive or negative chemistry between these people? So for example, let's say you're doing your reading and you're seeing a, Queen of Cups and a King of Swords. Not typically your, best, let's say, romantic combination. Well, how do these individuals get along? What is the chemistry between these two individuals represented in this reading? So for example, she is the Queen of Cups, he is the King of Swords. Well, what is the chemistry between those two cards themselves? Just the cards, if you look at it and say, okay, well, we have cups and we have swords. They're about very different things. Swords people are likely to be less patient with cupsy people because cupsy people are warm and fuzzy and cry easily, and sword people are more assertive and, all business. Those are things to keep in mind. So keep in mind what the cards themselves would be like should they decided to interact. And then think about too, yourself in one of those positions and how does that all relate? And then lastly, looking at whether or not you have any majors or what number of majors you have in your reading. If you have a lot of majors in your reading, that typically will point to something being of a little bit more importance. If you have a number of majors in your reading, then you might want to take a look at, again, how those interact with one another. How, having the Three of Swords in one position may not be so bad because it's buffered by, the Empress, or it's buffered by, whatever card. So again, taking a look at those relationships, taking a look at each of these different elements of the tarot, sort of turning them around, looking at them from different angles, and looking at how you can create a greater meaning. So those are the 3 phases of the reading. We have groundwork, analysis, which we've talked about both of those quite a bit, and synthesis, where your job is to come up with, to synthesize a broad scope meaning of the cards in front of you. And if you can start to think, along those lines as you are doing your reading, just start to notice. I'm not at all encouraging you to dig out more books and do all of that. This is, in my opinion, something that will just grow organically as you work with the tarot, as you begin to develop a relationship with the cards, your personal take on some of the cards, and how all of the pieces fit together. So it really is a very worthwhile exercise, and I'm hoping that it really does help you come up with a much richer and more satisfying tarot reading, or at least point you in that right direction, right? To keep you on that pathway as you're on your tarot journey. All right, everybody, I think that is it. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Please remember to like and subscribe and comment and all those things. And I will look forward to talking to you next week. Be well. Bye-bye.